Hello everybody, this is the introduction to 3ds Max for our class that I've been talking about doing and now finally got around to. What I wanted to cover in this video was just the really kind of basic introduction to the application itself. Max, as I think you've heard me say, is a very good environment for doing rendering. Particularly it's very good at lighting and texturing, but it's also principally its great virtue is that it can do quite complex modeling. Now, one of the differences obviously between Revit and Max is that whilst they're both owned by the same company, and there are some kind of relationships between those two applications which are really useful. One of the problems with Revit is it tends to be very much a menu-based process, and you tend to use obviously menu items which you drag and drop and place into a scene. Now, the good thing about this is it saves time. The bad thing about it is that it tends to homogenize what comes out of that application. Max is on the other end of the spectrum. It allows you to create very, very complex objects with very kind of complex geometries, but without, unfortunately, without the same kind of parametric values that you might normally associate with your Revit item. So we'll be doing some stuff which will go between Revit and Max in subsequent videos, but just for the introduction today, I just wanted to go through what it is that you're looking at. Now, the desktop, the user interface, the UI for Max can appear to be a bit complex at first vision. You may well, when you boot it up, Max in the CAD pools, instead of having this vision, you might have had just simply the perspective one. Now you can toggle between the four panels that you can see here and the single one just by clicking this button right down in the bottom right hand corner. So if I just left click that, it goes to the one that's selected, click it again, returns back to the 4. Now you notice that this panel is selected because it has a kind of a yellowy border around it. If I go into the other panels, as I left click on them, they each become individually selected. Now the 4 panels that you can see set up here, you can adjust in different ways, and there are some settings that if you choose to do you can amend. You can also move them around just by allowing the mouse to hover over the top of the line, and you can drag it to different places, okay, or even the middle, and you can change it in this way. So if you want to concentrate on one particular panel but still want the others to be visible, to return it to its original condition, you just right click in the center, hit reset layout, and it will go back to the 4 panel scenario that you can see. Now just a little note on, I suppose, just a couple of things that you need to do before you do anything in Max, and it's not obvious, but it's something that needs to be kind of worked out pretty early on. In it, the very first thing you should do after the page has come up is you go up to Customize, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that the units that you're working in are in metric. Okay, Max works like all Autodesk products, both in US and in European and Australian environments, and so there is it caters for both feet and inches and metric system. So we need to go to Unit Setup, which you can see here. Left click on that. There are 2 things that need to be changed. Okay, now in it we can see that it's currently at meters, which is fine. But you'll notice on the drop-down menu you've got millimeters, centimeters, or kilometers. Meters is sufficient for architectural projects. If I click into the US standard, you'll see it now comes to feet and fractional inches. Okay, which is very complex, but we'll stay in metric, of course, and we'll keep it at meters. We'll also go into left-click on the system unit setup, and again, we'll want to make sure that that's sitting in millimeters as well, or a metric value. You can agree between what you had before, meters and meters. Okay, and this is essentially setting up where your grid is. Just hit OK. You hit OK again, and we know now that anything that we make within these panels are going to be in a metric system. Alright, now I'll just take things, areas one at a time. You'll see that across the very top there are a series of areas or kind of types of functionalities within Max. On the Max logo itself, you'll click on that. It will bring up your basic kind of file management relationships, plus give you prompts for files that you've been using previously. We can also, if we go into edit, we'll be using a whole series of these things that work within we normally use icons for. Same with tools, group, views, create, modifiers, and I'll leave you to go through them. I very rarely use any of these. One we may use will be array. Okay, that's one that's actually fairly common, but doesn't have an icon. If we come down now and we look across the top bar that we see here for the polygonal modeling, you'll see you've got the back, an undo and a redo key, a link tool which we won't use very much, and some ones that you will use a lot. Okay, you'll notice that there's a blue background to this icon saying select object. That's your basic selection key, and that needs to be functioning whenever you want to select an object. You can also, if we left click on it, you can select things by types. Okay, and sometimes when you have very complex scenes, what you'll end up doing is you're choosing just to pick up a camera or a geometry or a light or something, so you'll only allow those things to be selected. So that's a way of filtering your selection process. You can also select by name. If I left click on that, there's nothing in it at the moment because we haven't created any objects, but there will be a series of all the objects that you've put down there. Okay, and you can search within that list to find ones that you want. That's actually a very useful tool for checking if things are in a scene. The rest of these I'll come to as we start working on actual geometry itself, but suffice to say you'll use most of these functions in a fairly kind of straightforward fashion when you get started. Alright, so first things first, I'm just going to make what's called some primitive geometry. Okay, now to do that, if I look over on the right hand side, we have a series of tabs. Okay, you have a create tab, which is the stuff that you can see here. You have a modify tab. Okay, and we'll be looking at this quite a bit in periods to come. Hierarchy, motion, display, and utilities you won't be using very much. Okay, there are a few things that you may need to do for those, but generally everything you'll be doing will be between the create and the modify tab. Okay, now on the create there's a second line of options that you have. Create geometry, shapes, lights, cameras, helpers, don't use those much, space warps, don't use those much, and system. Principally you'll be working with the first four, geometry, shapes, lights, and cameras. Okay, and under the shape that we have here, yet another kind of subgroup, you can see by default you have standard primitives. So I left click on that and it'll give us a whole series of things that we can create, okay, as geometry. So let's just go ahead and make something. Okay, I left click on the box, that's telling Max that I want to create a box, and I bring my cursor down into the perspective window. It doesn't matter where I go, it will work in any of these, but I can see what I'm doing if I work on the perspective area. And I just left click and then I drag out to where I want it roughly, release, push my mouse up, and then left click again, and that gives me geometry. Okay, now you'll notice that it turned up in all of the other windows at the same time. Okay, you'll notice also that when we created it, a series of parameters turned up in the create panel. That's telling me how much information I have in this particular object. Okay, it's telling me it's 74 meters long, 77 meters wide, and 48 meters high. Okay, and I can, just by left clicking, I can drag that down or up or in or down a bit. Okay, So there's a variety of different things that can be done in terms of shaping that. I can also just double click into that area and type in a value. Okay, and so I can set very precise values for this particular object. Now, just a note on how you use the mouse. Okay, now you'll notice when we're in this kind of situation that the cursor looks like a cross. Okay, that's because I still have box selected. Okay, so Max thinks I'm going to be making another box. If I merely want to just start working on this particular object, I have to go up and do the select object value. Okay, there's just a few more things I want to show you about this particular box before we get to that point. Alright, so you might want to think, if you want to start working with this, that you need to try and select it with your thing. What you end up doing is putting another box in the scene, which you don't want. So if I go, well, I want to select that box, and I kind of click near it. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm just making another box, okay, and another box. All right. Now, you'll notice that we now have 3 boxes, and one of them, the most recent one that we've created. Now let's go ahead and maximize this. The most recent one that we created, you see it has a little kind of boundary condition around it. That's your selection box, and that's essentially telling you that this is what you're currently working on. If I want to work on the original one, the pink one here, I would have to go back, as I said, hit select object and select it. Okay, and I now have that information. Same with this one. I can work with either of these. Now, if I just come out a little bit, okay, go back to my selection box things, and I do one more. What you can see is that I have a series of parameters that we were talking about previously that I can work with, including length, width and height segments. Now these are things that we may want to adjust, because essentially that's telling us how many vertices there are and lines and faces there are you want to have in this particular object. As a general rule of thumb, the more complex you need something to be, the more information has to be in it. Now I can change that by just left clicking on the length segments and just pushing up. Okay, and I can start to add, that's way too many, I can start to add values. Yeah, well, one thing I need to do first. Okay, on the very top left hand side here you can see there's a couple of kind of parameters that we can hover over and get values on. If I left click on perspective, it's telling me I'm looking through the perspective view. Okay, and it gives you different kind of windows that you can look through in this particular panel. Alright, but also if I then left click over the realistic one, okay, what you often want to try have it showing is edged faces. Okay, now if I do edged faces, that's, you'll see there was a change in the box that we've been working on. And what I can do is that I can begin to, edge faces will show you how much information you have or you're putting into your model. Okay, so I push that up, it's got 5 length, 3 width and 12 height segments to it. And when we come to do things with this geometry, that's actually quite important. Now if I just click away and deselect all of this, just a few kind of tips now on what to do with your mouse. Okay, now people work in different ways and there's no kind of right way. What I tend to do is when I want to pan around, you depress the middle mouse button or wheel, depress it and you'll see there's a hand, you can pan around. You can also, if you hold down Alt, you can rotate around. Okay, so middle mouse button and the Alt key allows you to rotate around. Okay, now if we just go back to the 4 panel view, it's only working, you'll notice it only works in the panel that you have selected. Okay, the other ones that we can see here, front, top and left, aren't affected. Okay, this is just about how you look in this particular panel. Now I might now just the next note I wanted to bring up in this particular video. Alright, you notice that we have these 4 objects that we've selected. Oh, to move in and out to is just you roll the mouse wheel. So it's depressing it, rolling it out, rolling it in. Okay. Now, these other objects that we've selected, okay, and I'll just reinforce what I was saying before. You can see now we have the names of the 4 boxes that have been created, boxes 1 through to 4. Okay. We can also, once we've selected these, give them names. Okay. It has a name and color. It's called box 3. I'll call that green. Call this one dark blue. Call this one aqua. And call this one pink. Okay. Now you might have more other names because I'm a particular kind of colours, which means that when I come to the drop down menu, there they are: aqua, dark blue, green and pink. Okay, and you can see that green is the one that's currently selected because it's whited out. Right, so hit OK. Alright, now having made some of these boxes, something you might kind of want to do is like, oh, well, I want to put some more information into one of my primitives. Okay, to do that, you can't do it in the Create tab because Create is dedicated to the process of making primitives in this instance. But you can, if it's selected, come through to the Modify tab. Okay, and there you have all of the aspects of the box that you had already created, and I can go in then and manipulate the values for that, okay, and give it some more information as I see fit. Alright, and still under the modified, to come back I can do the same thing with dark blue. Again, more parameters, and the pink. And there you go. Alright, so we now have 4 quite increasingly complex objects. To go through and make some more things, I have to come back, okay, it's important, into my Create tab, and I now am able to start creating again. Okay, and you'll notice that there are a series of other kind of geometries that you can create: spheres, cylinders, torus, the famous teapot. Let's put one in. Why a teapot, you ask? Teapots are just complex geometries used to demonstrate texture and shading and lighting in a scene very quickly. But the others, the cone, geosphere, tube, pyramid, plane, use a series of different clicks in order to define their value. Okay, so the cylinder, for example, is 1 click to define its radius in this instance. Let release, then click again to give you its height, and you can begin to manipulate the amount of complexity in that object. Okay, everything from 3, well, of course it can't be anything less than 3, otherwise it's not a solid volume. Okay, up to 16 in this instance. And again, once I click away and deselect it, I can come back once I've selected it and again manipulate its values in the Modifier tab. Alright, one final little thing before we just pause on this particular recording. Okay, what is useful to know too is a thing called auto grid. Okay, because you'll notice that if we look at all of these objects, they're all sitting independent of each other, and they're all sitting by default at 0, 0, or 0 in terms of the Z scale. Okay, sometimes you might want to put something on top of it and to start at a particular location. To do that, you do auto grid. Okay, you turn that on, if it'll let me. Oh, I need to tell it what to do something. So I do auto grid, I turn that on, and then if I hover my mouse over these different objects, you'll notice I can begin to create objects that work from that plane, either a horizontal one or a vertical one. Okay, That's with auto grid turned on. If I go and do another box for this time, do it around this cylinder, you'll notice that it works perpendicular to the surface of the cylinder that we can see here. Okay. Alright, so that's probably enough just for this first lesson. What have we gone through? We've gone through how to set up your units. We've gone through looking at making a basic geometry, how you can add its amend its value by using create it through the Create tab, and then amend its values through the Modify tab. We've gone through naming the objects. Oh, one thing we haven't done, which I can also show you, is that if I just make another object, I'll make it a tube this time, left click, left click, left click, is that you can, if you left click next to in the color palette swatch next to the name, double click that, the object color comes up, and I can then assign a different color to that particular object. Okay, so you can look at different ways, you know, of just identifying which object is which by assigning particular colors. All right, that's probably